Hey Facebook, it's Michelle Crawford here, and if you're around the area where I am at the moment, it's really interesting weather. It's really funny. You're not sure if it's hot or it's cold or it's muggy or maybe it's going to hail or potentially all those things within a few minutes of each other. But what I thought would be really interesting to have a discussion about this afternoon is all about listening. So I just wanted to share with you, as a consultant, when we go into organisations or work with teams or individuals, there's a lot of things obviously that people consider that we're contributing as value to them. But one of those important elements that is often underrated is about listening. And we often talk, amongst ourselves after working with a particular client about how, in essence, we've been paid to listen. And that's a good thing, because unfortunately at the moment there are so many individuals and teams and people having experiences in their lives where they're just totally and completely feeling as though they're not heard. And sometimes they feel really not heard by their colleagues. Sometimes they feel like that from their managers. Sometimes they could feel like that from their partners. And so I just wanted to explore this idea of listening a little bit today. And I think the biggest thing that I run into, and I've also been guilty of definitely in the past, is that my need to put forward my idea in that moment of the conversation has been much higher than the need that I have had to create a safe space for the other person to feel as though they've been heard. And it's really interesting because it's so easy to fall into that habit of speaking over someone or jumping in with your idea before they've had a chance to express their idea. It's also really easy when you're in a group or a team sort of setting to want to get out the stuff that you've got in your head without having that awareness, and also without really understanding how to actively go about and create the space for the other person to be heard. And I think that in my experience, listening is a really underrated workplace skill. And what I mean by that is, if you go into most workplaces and you were to ask their executive teams or their boards or any other sort of team, if you were to simply say, if you were to rate yourself 1 to 10 on the listening scale, where do you think you'd fall? I think most people tend to feel as though, and tend to believe and think and act as if they're fantastic leaders. But if you really think about it, it's a skill that not many of us have learned well. I don't think I can ever recall a time in my life where I was, sat down as a child and really genuinely taught to be able to hear and listen through a conversation. And certainly I was never ever taught how to actively create the space where the other person could feel safe and heard. And the reason why it's such a underrated skill in workplaces is because when people don't feel heard, a whole bunch of other things start to happen. And what you see in organisations and in teams is that you start reaping the rewards of people not feeling like they've been heard. So you get lots of frustration, you get people disengaging. You just have to look at disengagement statistics in the workforce to know that at least part of that is being created because people have not been heard. And I think you could probably put yourself in that situation as well, when you've been in a relationship yourself with another person and you've been trying to say this thing that's on your mind, or you've been actively trying to get an idea out and put it on the table, and maybe it gets squashed on by the other person. Maybe the other person's just so excited about what they have to say that they don't have the patience to wait for you. So what I would suggest to you in your world, there's so many things that we have access to that are simply behaviours that we choose to do that can genuinely change our experience of the world around us. And listening is in that category. If you have zero money, zero resources, and you really want to shift and change, my suggestion is to focus foremost and beyond anything else in and around your listening. I can see that a few people have jumped on and you're listening to the live stream. It's a very one-dimensional kind of experience when you're talking into a live stream. So if any of you have questions, or you want to reflect, or you want to, just check in or share some ideas, feel free to go ahead and do that. But I think that the other element that I'd like to connect this to is our challenge as leaders. Because when we're in the workplace, as leaders, our job is to make the tough decisions. Our job is to process all of the information that we hear from people about what's wanted and what's needed, along with our own view, and ultimately make a decision about that. And very often there's a lot of decisions that can be made in workplaces that are made in an ill-informed way, because the time has not been taken or created to check in with people and see how they're feeling about something. And when that's done over and over and over again, you end up sending a message to those people that they don't matter anyway. Who cares what they think? Who cares what their view is? Who cares what their concerns are? And it's easy for people to start to think that, because really that's how they're being treated in many respects. So for those of you who are leaders, and whether that's an informal leadership title or whether it's a formal leadership title, I'd pose the same challenge to you, to each of you. Where is it in your world that you can put more effort into creating the space for your people to be heard? And I guarantee that you'll get a massive return on that investment. So good luck. I'm waiting for my little girl to finish one of her activities that she does in the afternoon. And then she, no doubt, will jump in the car and say, "Mummy, can we play the listening game?" And the listening game is a really fun game. It's also something that you can use in a workshop. So I'll share it with you briefly as a good take home before we wrap up the live stream. And the no questions, listening carefully. Thanks for that post. The listening game is something that you can do in a small or a large team. And you have one person who's the speaker and one person who's the listener. And in the first round of the game, the speaker has to speak about something that they're really passionate about, and they have to speak about that topic for 1 minute. And the listener, in the first part of the game, has to do +6 listening. So +6 listening is like you would be the world's biggest listening expert. You're listening with your heart, with your head, with your hands. You're listening with your whole self as to what the other person is actually saying. And then, of course, you debrief about what the experience was like. Then what you do is you swap roles, and the person who's then listening has to do -6 listening. So the worst, crappiest, most terrible, horrible version of any kind of listening. You can be walking to the other side of the room, you can be looking at what's on your watch, you can be playing with your phone, you can be talking over the other person, and it's lots of fun, actually. Unfortunately, it's a reflection of how we often experience this. But if you're doing -6 listening, then you simply debrief that exact same exercise. So I hope that that's a really tangible, fun thing that you can take away from this live stream. And thank you for listening, and thank you for jumping on, and hope you have a fantastic evening. Cheers.